The views and opinions expressed on this program are those of the participants and do not reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
BronxNet. Your voice, your views, your vision.
Good evening and welcome to BronxTalk. In his State of the State address, Governor Cuomo announced broad initiatives at gun control, management of utility companies, the minimum wage, and lots more. Tonight we'll talk about those initiatives and others with Bronx representatives from both houses. Because of the Martin Luther King Day holiday, there won't be calls tonight, but you can send your questions or comments via email to bronxtalk@hotmail.com. And we'll read those on the air during a future edition of our program. So let's talk with our state representatives who are calling in from Albany, where things are happening as we speak. From the 82nd Assembly District, it is Michael Benedetto. Good evening, Assemblyman. How are you?
Good evening to you, Gary, and thanks so much for reaching out and making me part of tonight's discussion.
Great, thank you. And from the 29th Senate District, the newly appointed chair of the Democratic Conference, Senator Jose Marco Serrano. Senator Serrano, good evening. Thanks for joining us.
Good evening, Gary. Thank you very much for having us.
We do expect to be joined a little later on from the 36th Senatorial District by Ruth Hassell-Thompson. But for now, let's start with the two elected officials we have with us. Senator Serrano, let's start with you. First of all, congratulations on your appointment. I guess for you, this is really a wonderful thing. And right now, you really have to roll up your sleeves and get to work. You didn't have a lot of time to celebrate, did you?
No, and it really is an exciting time for the Democratic Conference. I think with our new leadership under Senator Andrea Stewart-Cousins, it really is an exciting time to be in the Senate, and I haven't really been able to say that much over the last couple of years. It is going to be an interesting session before us. I think the governor laid out a very ambitious agenda of progressive items, and I really do look forward to getting to work on it.
Well, I should mention to viewers that we're taping this on Monday night, the 14th. So some of the things that we talk about as like late breaking, actually by the time they may see it on TV, then they may find that it is, it's in a way old news, but for us right now, it's new news. Senator, let's talk very explicitly about this gun bill that apparently, at least according to what the news reports are, is really right ready to go and ready to become probably the strictest gun laws in the nation. Where are we at right now?
Well, we haven't seen a bill yet, but indications we've been given is that a bill will be ready and will be printed. I'm not sure what Assemblyman Benedetto's been told out over in the Assembly. But what sort of the indications that we've been hearing is that something will happen tonight, and it is very exciting and very important. And I think it's something that New Yorkers and folks in the Bronx are asking for, some common sense and aggressive gun control laws that will make our streets safer, will make our families and children feel safer. And so I haven't seen the language yet, so I don't know exactly what will happen. But once we do get language, we will conference it. And we will move forward, hopefully, with a vote tonight.
You know, there's this idea out there, and I understand we're also about to be joined by Senator Ruth Hassell-Thompson, which will be great.
I'm here.
Oh, she is
I'm
here. Good. Nice to have you, Senator. Thank you for joining the dialogue. Senator Serrano, there's a lot of talk about, the way things are going to be done. You just said that, we haven't seen the bill yet. Is it somewhat disturbing that, gee whiz, there is, kind of a secret discussion going on? Or do you feel like individual senators will be able to have their say?
Well, I think it's unfortunate that the Republican conference, in many ways, they really don't give us the information that we need in a timely manner. So oftentimes, we don't get the opportunity to look at legislation as with the amount of time that we should. We saw that with rules changes last week, and we're experiencing it today. But I do feel confident that, based on what the governor has put forth in his remarks and his speech last week, that the bill that will be put forth will have teeth, will be meaningful, that it will definitely do something to alleviate some of the problems we've been seeing with assault weapons and excessive amounts of ammunition that can be bought for these assault weapons. So while indeed we haven't seen anything yet, I do feel pretty positive that we will have a bill that will be meaningful.
Do you find that it's going to be easier, especially in this case where there really is progressive legislation potentially on the table? It will be easier with now this third independent, Jeff Klein's independent conference, to get progressive issues passed? Or do you think this is yet another roadblock toward getting things passed? How do you view the landscape in the Senate right now?
Well, that's yet to be seen, and I think that's the big question on everyone's mind. I think it's pretty obvious that the progressive platforms that the governor put forth last week are not things that the traditional Republican conference are very excited about. They seem to be a little bit uncomfortable, if their body language is any indication, during his speech last week. So again, I think these are initiatives and issues, whether it be gun control, whether it be minimum wage. These are things that Democrats have been talking about for a very long time, and we're very much in step with the governor. But I think that it's yet to be seen how the Republicans will move forward. But again, These are things that Democrats have been pushing for, fighting for years.
So we'll find out shortly. I guess you're in as much suspense over those kinds of things as we are. Stay with us, though. Let's talk to Assemblyman Benedetto. You know, it occurred to me in thinking about things like the ban on assault weapons, potentially, of course, the limit to 7-bullet magazines, tougher penalties for illegal gun use, maybe expanding implementation of Kendra's law, that in your district in the East Bronx, maybe the voters are a little more moderate. Do you feel like that's the case, or do you feel like your entire district is really in sync with these kinds of innovations to New York's gun laws?
Well, it is true, and certainly a good part of my district tends to be a little bit more moderate than the rest of the Bronx. However, on this particular, I think my constituents, in large numbers, fully realize that something must, with the weapons that we have on the street, that there has to be tighter controls on who gets these guns, was allowed to carry guns, that they certainly share a question mark whether assault-type weapons needed by anybody but the military. So I'm very comfortable that my constituents favor the governor's proposal as he's put forth, and will support any legislation we vote on. It
seems almost easy to ask a Democratic Assembly member about, supporting the governor on these initiatives. Is there any dialogue in the Assembly side over this, or it's pretty much, hey, let's get it going and let's hope, across the House there they can come up with something good for us?
One of the great things about the legislative body that I sit in, we have 150 members. Those members come from all around the state. Not everybody shares the feelings on any one particular issue that somebody else might have. And so while many of us in the city are very much in favor of gun control legislation, many others in our conference want to moderate any bills that come forward, because they live upstate, and having guns part of their culture and a hunting culture that children, the correct way use guns and respect for guns. And we as a conference have learned to respect the opinions of other people and listen to them. So, yes, there is quite a bit of discussion in my conference on this particular bill, but that's good discussion.
Senator Thompson, thank you for joining us. We didn't get to welcome you properly. We certainly appreciate you joining us tonight. Tell me a little bit about your perspective on what you think is going to happen here. The governor has laid it out there about the 4 points that I talked about. He laid out a 7-point plan. Do you think it's going to pass unscathed, or do you foresee some sort of compromise along the way in the Senate over the 4 items that I mentioned?
Well, I listened to both of my colleagues' discussion, and I don't think that I can deviate too much from any of their comments, except to say that for me, I consider this to be a major step, but a first step, because while assault weaponry is what's under discussion, handguns are more rampant in many of our communities, and we have yet to address that as a part of this issue. But what I'm hopeful is that once we open the door for discussion, that other kinds of things will come on the table to be discussed.
What do you think?
Again, part of what Senator Serrano had said to you was a concern that I have, and we have yet to see what the final product looks like. We're going to be called into conference at 8:30, and that hopefully at that time the bill will be before us, so we can get a good look at what has been officially proposed and what we think we're going to be voting on before the night is over. But I think certainly what I'm hoping we will see in there is some semblance of the discussion that we've constantly been having as a part of the Democratic Conference, and that is on micro-staffing, and so that we can not only talk about the kinds of weaponry, but we can talk about the origins of where ammunition and things are coming from, which helps us to pinpoint how these guns are getting into our communities, because certainly we're not manufacturing guns in the state of New York.
What do you make of the argument that we've heard all along that New York State has the most strict gun laws in the nation already, and yet, we haven't solved the gun problem? I mean, I know in your district there have been just some terrible shootings, and frankly, all over the Bronx. What do you make about people who say, you know what, you keep making the laws stricter, but that's not really getting to the root of the problem? That's for Senator Thompson.
Well, I've heard the same comment that you have, that the New York State has the toughest gun laws in the state on assault weaponry. But there's a gap between what's on the books and what we see happening in our communities every day.
We're getting a little feedback there. Go ahead. Continue. We'll keep going. Did we have her? We lost her? Do we lose them all, or do we have? I'll even ask. She's there with us?
I'm still here.
Okay, go ahead. I'm sorry. There was just some technical thing there. So go ahead.
Okay, that's okay. But you're right in terms of, I've heard the same thing that you've heard, is that New York State has one of the toughest gun laws in the country. But I think what we also have to be responding to is what's happening nationally. You know, as I've traveled around the state and around the country as a part of the National Black Caucus of State Legislators, we've looked at the different gun laws in different states, the state of Georgia, the state of Alabama, and where the gun laws are very, very different from the state of New York. And until we put what we've done with the national, help to create the national model, and I think that that's really what I'm hoping that New York will begin to do is create the language for a national model that's going to say the guns that are in our community.
I want to move over to Senator Serrano. Now, you have been the chair of the Arts and Culture Committee. We had a dialogue on this show just a little while ago about the nature of those things and the relationship to those things and the mental health of people in New York State. At this point, in addressing the entire package of gun violence, is it going to be possible legislatively to address issues like mental health, like supporting young people, giving them other kinds of outlets, or is this something that's going to have to happen, a dialogue that's going to have to happen in other places other than in the state houses?
Well, that's a very interesting question, Gary, and also to take half a step back to your previous question about those who say that we have already on the books some of the toughest gun laws. Well, you got to ask, who is it that's saying that? I think gun laws can be improved and strengthened. I think, obviously, the gun lobby thinks that we already have strong gun laws on the books because they don't want us to make them any stronger. But the truth is that legislation, hopefully, that we will put forth tonight will expose and close many of the loopholes that have made it easy for some people to get guns, and especially in the wrong hands. But again, I do agree that with many others who say that there needs to be a comprehensive nationwide ban on assault weapons. There needs to be leadership from the federal government on dealing with the proliferation of assault weapons and weapons from other states that wind up in New York. So it is comprehensive, but again, that doesn't mean we should do nothing here in New York State. If there is an opportunity to strengthen the laws and to close loopholes, then we have a responsibility and an obligation to do that. Speaking to your direct question about mental health and dealing with youth in our community, I think that is something that needs to be part of the holistic approach to ending violence or dealing with violence. And you're right. I mean, I think that there's a lot of ways thinking outside the box, and we should be exploring everything, leaving no stone unturned.
Do you see that as something that can happen in the legislature, or is that in the state legislature, or is that really a city question, and frankly, even a dialogue that happens to happen, at the community level?
I think it can happen on a state level. One of the things that I've learned up here is that so much of the legislation that we pass affects all of the cities, towns, and counties throughout the state. And we are looked to by the municipalities for leadership and for legislation like this. And I think we should look at a holistic approach. We should look at the mental health issues involving gun ownership and preventing gun ownership from people who should not have guns and have access to guns, and finding ways to deter youth from even getting into any kind of situation where they feel that they need guns. Mm-hmm. So I think that this is it has to be a really multifaceted approach to dealing with gun violence.
Let's move to a different issue, and we'll go around with everybody. We'll start with you, Senator Serrano. Governor proposed minimum wage up to $8.75. I'm going to make a wild guess and say you support the idea, but give me the political landscape on this. Is this going to be an easy one to get through, or is it going to be your typical Albany rancor, especially in the Senate, to try and get a raise in the minimum wage?
Well, I think for Democrats it's going to be very easy.
How did I know?
Yeah, but I think that there will be roadblocks, and they will be more than likely coming from the Republican conference, and I think it's unfortunate. I believe that whether you're a Democrat or Republican, I don't believe that minimum wage should be a partisan issue at all. I think whether you're a Democrat or Republican, if you put more money into the pockets of hardworking people, that's better for the economy. That's better for Democrats. It's better for Republicans. It doesn't matter who it is. It's better for the economy of our state. And what's so incredible is that you hear Republicans go on and on and on about how we need to strengthen the economy, how we have to create better jobs. It's all about jobs, jobs, jobs. And here we are trying to strengthen wages so that jobs are more meaningful, and they don't want any part of it. So I think it's important to remember that at the minimum wage as it stands right now, people cannot afford to support themselves or their family. It's common sense to raise it.
Let's ask Assemblyman Benedetto, who works in a district where there are many small businesses. Do you hear from small business owners like, uh-oh, don't do that because we're not going to be able to afford it?
Actually, no. And as
Great.
a matter of fact, some of the small business owners in my district have actually come up to me and said they are all for an increase in the minimum wage. I think they are smart enough to realize that every time there is a raise in the minimum wage, that the people who get that raise in their income spend it locally and spend it in small businesses, and benefits come through. And studies have shown every time this has happened, there has been increased dollar flow to local communities. To the business sector, those small businesses, they know the benefits that will come their way once we do this.
Senator Thompson, can the economy hold a raise in the minimum wage at this point, given the way that budgets are as tight as they've ever been, and there are all kinds of slashes to all kinds of empowerment programs? Can the economy in the state of New York hold a minimum wage of $8.75?
I think the state of New York is going to have to be able to support it, because we have to begin to pay a livable wage for people in this state. We continue to talk about cuts to welfare. We continue to talk about cuts to benefits to families. And if we don't balance that with a higher minimum wage, then we're really just doing an injustice to our communities.
After Hurricane Sandy, we on this show and certainly throughout the state engaged a rather vigorous debate about the prospects and the costs of burying power lines and making those kinds of changes to our energy infrastructures that might protect New Yorkers in case of emergencies and devastation like what we had with Hurricane Sandy. Is there enough money out there to urge Con Ed and the other power companies to do things like that? Is there enough will to do something like that, or is that still too bold in this day and age?
I think the will is there. I think that the incentive to Con Edison and to some of the other power companies is where we have to begin. We have to incentivize for them, just as we had a big stride on conversion when people began to look at how do you convert from oil to gas. Con Edison jumped on that and began to do some very innovative things within the company to encourage consumers to participate. And then that way our dependency on oil begins to be reduced. And I think we have to do the same kind of thing under these conditions in order to help.
Right. I want to just move on to
incentivize.
I want to move on to your colleagues because we are slowly running out of time, but I want them each to weigh in on it. Assemblyman Benedetto, tell me about how your community fared in Hurricane Sandy, and then after going through all of that, what you would recommend now. Is burying power lines the kind of thing you'd like to see?
I think we have to go across the board. We've got to find the money and come up with a long-range plan to, number one, yes, bury the power line so we don't lose our electricity, and that's protected. Also, we have to come up with a plan of moving the power generator. We can't have in downtown in Lower Manhattan on Ed's power generators, on the first level. We got to learn in areas like to bring them up or keep them out of areas like that. We have to come up with a long-range plan to find the money, do the studies, so we can make New York City safe or mitigate any future storms that come our way and that are coming our way.
Assemblyman, thank you very much for your time. Senator Thompson, thank you for your time. We'll let the final question go to Senator Serrano. One of the things the governor talked about was privatizing LIPA out on Long Island. I realize that's not directly related to us here in the Bronx, but is that the kind of direction you think we ought to go? Maybe not say it directly about Con Ed, but is that the out-of-the-box thinking that you think could be applied or duplicated in other circumstances to improve our energy structure in the state of New York?
Well, it's really hard to say, Gary. I mean, I think we have a very specific situation that happened out with the Long Island Power Authority that the governor, I think, is rightly concerned about and very upset about, the slow reaction time to dealing with the situation. But I don't know the answer, if privatization or not is the answer, because it's sort of it has to be a different approach in varying different situations. I don't generally buy into the whole notion that the government is completely inept and therefore only private companies can do the job of government. But I do think that there needs to be some balance, some middle ground, and it has to be taken on a case-by-case basis. And I do think that during Hurricane Sandy, it was a major, major failure on behalf of the utility companies. And I think even to this day, the effects are still being felt in many communities across the area. So I definitely think something needs to be done, and I'm happy to see how aggressive the governor is on changing that.
Senator Jose Marcos Serrano, Senator Ruth Hassell-Thompson, and Assemblyman Michael Benedetto, I really want to thank you. This went too quickly, as always, but very, very well. And I know while you're up in Albany, sometimes it's hard to get you folks, but I think maybe we have a nice, established something nice here. And as we go forward through the year and through this legislative session, maybe we can do it again.
I would love to do it.
Great. Thank you all so much. And folks, if you have further comments or questions on anything you heard on tonight's show or anything going on in the Bronx, then email them to us at BronxTalk@hotmail.com or make a comment on our Facebook page, and we'll read those on the air during a future edition of our program. Archives of Bronx Talk are available at bronxnet.org. You click Bronx Talk on the right-hand navigation bar. Also, please become a fan of Bronx Talk on Facebook. Thanks to our producer, Jane Folloro. Our director tonight was Shirley Arrieta. First time she's directed our show. We really appreciate her fine work. And nice to have Dina back in the studio with us. And so we will see you next Monday night at 9, as always, for Bronx Talk. And so have a great night. Good night.
Clean kitchen surfaces, utensils, and hands with soapy water. 1 in 6 Americans will get sick from food poisoning this year. Keep your family safer. Check your steps at foodsafety.gov.
2 outs with a runner on first base. Now the big guy comes up to bat, hitting .342 with 92 RBIs and 36 homers. First pitch is out.
Chill raw and prepared foods promptly. 1 in 6 Americans will get sick from food poisoning this year. Keep your family safer. Check your steps at foodsafety.gov.